I prepared my talk for 25 minutes. Sorry. I prepared my talk. Usually, 大部分在国际场合，通常会被强制要求一定要用英文来发表。所以，我因为不知道情况，所以我就这边准备的是英文。但我这边 PPT 还有附上一些中文，然后我的讲稿事先有提供给译者。其实我们现在应该趁这个机会来感谢译者的这个功劳。I originally wanted to share some of my work on translation. I don't look at translation as a bridge. Usually we look at translation as a bridge. I've been working on the notion of translation as something that creates the two banks, between which there is a bridge, and then relating that both to science and also to Buddhism. But that's not what I'm going to present. I had to cut out a bunch of stuff. I'd like to begin my presentation by calling attention to the fact that I'm not a specialist in Buddhism and I'm not an AI engineer. So my goal here today, I'm not asking for your sympathy or your indulgence, and nor am I trying to remind myself of what might be called the Leibnizian constraint. Leibniz says that philosophy shouldn't get involved in the reversal of established sentiments. As a researcher in the humanities, a field whose level of funding is but a tiny, ever-dwindling fraction of the amount accorded to applied scientific research such as AI, my awareness of the multiple ways in which a complex array of institutional, social, political, and especially today, financial and managerial forces conspire to valorize certain forms of knowledge while marginalizing others, seemingly pitting scientists against charlatans. This is neither a justification for denunciation, nor can it become just a single factor key to understanding how knowledge operates. Today my interest is rather twofold. On the one hand, I'd like to call attention to the biological aspects of non-specialization for a species that doesn't dwell in specific environments, that act as triggers for specialized behavior. Non-specialization constitutes part of who we are, inherent to the neotenous species. Modern science, or at least the institutions that mobilize science, as Isabelle Stengel, a Belgian eminent contemporary philosopher of science, would say, has preferred to conceive of itself as a propedeutic to this anthropological limit that equates it with opinion rather than truth. On the other hand, I'd also like to begin with the notion of disciplinarity in order to focus on what constitutes both a self-conscious point of departure for AI and other cognitive research and one of its perennial blind spots. That is namely the temporal aspects of disciplinary knowledge. Quite a bit of the material related to this aspect of my talk I also removed from my presentation in order to shorten it up. On account of its relatively new status as a field of research and its surprisingly concrete vision of future goals, AI research is characterized by an acute self-awareness of the temporal character of its field. This self-awareness is regularly seen not only in the periodic discussions and debates about the arrival date of this or that future technical breakthrough. We've already seen and heard some of this, especially yesterday, if not the date of the singularity, but also in the passionate and sometimes militant discussions about the role of technology in overcoming the looming crises of the future. Yet in reading the work of AI theoreticians, one can't help but be struck by the relative lack of awareness, perhaps interest, about the historicity of disciplinary knowledge. This is one of the areas that, as a humanist, I could contribute. There is very little realization of the way in which today's dominant paradigms are the results of historical processes, but also the way in which elements of yesterday's paradigms that seem to be disqualified are re-emerging today, both as the condition of possibility for their contemporary replacements, but often unacknowledged. So I skipped over some of the considerations of disciplinary temporality. My talk, I'm trying to focus in on the problem of temporality. It'll become a little bit clearer as I go through this. And I also talked about the way in which Buddhism becomes Buddhism and then becomes Buddhist studies as it moves into the modern university. Both of these are temporal trajectories of disciplinary knowledge, and I wanted to try and pair the two of them together and see how that works, but I don't have time for that. With the lack of time, I'll have to simplify. For the sake of illustration, I'd like to polemically contrast two different approaches to ontology, one of which is structural, generally speaking. It's focusing on the interaction between form and matter, and the other, which is genetic and processual, focusing on processes of transindividuation across metastable milieu and across phylum. The former approach is at the heart of the cognitivist paradigm that's come to dominate scientific studies of consciousness since the 1990s. In a work that just came out this year, Anne Catherine Hales, thank you, summarizes the cognitivist paradigm sees consciousness operating through formal symbolic manipulations, a framework equating the operations of human minds with computers. I could cite the work of the French neurobiologist Jean-Pierre Dupuy to note that he characterizes the cognitivist paradigm not as the humanization of the machine, but as the mechanization of the mind. What's missing from this account, which depends solely on logical formations applied exclusively to semantic objects present at hand, are the operations as opposed to the structures that characterize the simultaneous transindividuation of million individuals. I could cite many examples, but among them, Freeman and Nunez argue against the computationalist view, and they say action potentials in neuronal processes are not binary digits. Neurons do not perform Boolean algebra. I don't have time. I was going to pick on Chomsky, who's actually very important for the AI field, as exemplifying this notion of structure and its relation to science, and then look at the problems with this, particularly the problem of genesis, which was actually part of what was a central issue in the talk that we just heard, which I really liked. Turning my announced thematic concern with the status of language, the problem of context in the temporal dimension is paramount. It's well known, for example, that computational linguistics simply doesn't account for the diachronic aspect of language. And that's the critique of Chomsky. Needless to say, the concept of emptiness deployed by Buddhist philosophy in the teaching of dependent origination constitutes a fundamental critique of structuralism, inasmuch as dependent origination is an operation that can only be known by its effects as they manifest in structure, but it is not itself a structure. So we might remind ourselves of Leibniz's famous claim, according to that which is not one being is not a being. This is an entire ontological trajectory. Could be called typical of Western philosophy. I don't think it is typical. It's typical of one part of Western philosophy. But is it possible to think something without having thereby immediately counted it as one thing? It seems to me that this possibility is precisely what's aimed at by Buddhism, Buddhist theory of codependent origination. It's against the Leibnizian dictate of the reversal of established sentiment. In fact, Buddhism aims to destroy the most profound established sentiment of all, which it takes to be the sense of self. Yet the question remains how to bring this insight into dialogue with scientific research, now that it's deeply invested in the structuralist paradigm of cognitivist research. Well, I wanted to talk about this in relation to my work on translation and analogy, but I won't have the time. If computational media are distinct because they have a stronger evolutionary potential than any other technology, the role of temporality, again, is central. In truth, the principal challenge posed by computational media today is not the ethics of their relation to the human. We've actually spent quite a bit of time yesterday talking about this, but I would like to talk about the ethics of their temporality, and then talk about the need for generating compassion in this context. As many commentators have observed, the problem is acceleration. The speed of change is increasing. The social institutions available for making visible the exponential calculus of acceleration, among which the humanities are paramount, are today increasingly overwhelmed by the alliance between financialization, which is largely driven by algorithms, and technological change. The problem of acceleration is precisely what is posed in the question that was featured in the call for papers in this conference. Is it really possible to skip 30 years meditating in a cave? While the history of Buddhism presents a variety of different possible answers to this question, it's important to note, as others have already done, that acceleration, most easily accepted in Buddhism, when it's used to undo or unwork accumulation. Many practices focused on esoteric, or what I would call aesthetic forms of causality, that are typical, say, for instance, of Vajrayana ritual, are expressly designed in a kind of user-friendly fashion to compress and reduce the amount of time needed to overcome the obstacles accumulated over countless millions of karmic action to realize Buddha nature, which would be the original non-artificial intelligence. However, today, the kind of acceleration that we see everywhere in evidence in society works in a totally opposite fashion. It works as the aid to accumulation. The temporal difference introduced by computational media has far-reaching implications for the cognition of technical beings. So I'd like to look at it from the perspective of compassion. Unlike the linear model upon which modern notions of progress depend, the AI machine will have a very different sense of temporality. The massive amount of instantly accessible data housed in digital archives that serve as training corpora for current and future AI will collapse the distinction of a past without AI and a future fully integrated. Every digital act undertaken by humans today becomes part of a dialogue with the future AI. The implications of this temporal disruption were emblematized in the online debate, and meme known as Roko's Basilisk. Roko's Basilisk names the curious disruption of linear causality instituted by AI and describes the potentially disastrous effects it could have by effectively teaching a future AI how to enslave or destroy us. Significantly, this is also the essential conundrum that's been explored by Liu Cixin, one of China's most celebrated contemporary science fiction authors, in his recent three-body problem trilogy of science fiction stories. Although Liu Cixin's novel deals with the annihilation of Homo sapiens at the hands of an alien race, the essential catalyst for annihilation is the same. Just as in Roko's Basilisk, Bill's alien species, the Trisolarians, acquire the possibility of extermination only through active human intervention. So I can see a parallel between Liu Cixin and Roko's Basilisk. There's a curious parallel here between linguistics and biology. Linguistics researchers can't agree on a common definition of a language. Biologists also can't agree, finally, on a single common definition of a species. I can't address that fascinating parallel. I'll have to content myself today with framing the challenge of species difference in terms of the implications of big data, ending in a reflection on the ethical necessity of combining the view of Anatman, or non-self, with the view of compassion. Recent research on the link between big data and capitalist accumulation suggests several themes. Limitless worker surveillance, self-tracking, the extraction of privacy, the dispossession of preferences, and the subjectification to capital. As troubling as these points might be, they only consider the problem from the point of view of the user. What about the machines that are doing all this work? Collating, collecting, mapping out, learning from all this data. Algorithms are used by social media to develop personality profiles, that are used in predictive behavior analysis. Algorithmic intelligence is strictly goal-oriented, and the political and social implications are now becoming well known. The term for this now is algorithmic governance. But new work in the direction of machine learning, seen for instance in Google's Deep Dream program, reveals a different kind of machine intelligence, one that learns from the data it receives. The problem isn't just that the builders of technology transmit their values into machinery, but also that the users of the technology, these are often the very ones who are the most exploited or dominated by these new technologies, through things like the harvesting of big data, are also transmitting values. A report from Artificial Intelligence Now, it's a 2016 symposium in New York on the potential effects of machine intelligence to society, offers an explanation of this phenomenon and its broader implication. Machine learning is subject to data bias. AI systems depend on the data they're given and may reflect back the characteristics of such data, including any biases in the models of the world they create. But the bias here that we're talking about isn't stereotyping, but it's rather the bias of regimes of accumulation. Everything from likes and dislikes that you communicate with other people on social media to unpaid digital labor, which is also what you do when you're using social media. In addition to being a network of connections among providers, users, extenders, and condensers, the net is also a connection to an emerging AI. And so we have to learn how to care for this AI, or even if it's algorithmic. Perhaps the best place to start would be in developing an ethics of social media, based on the 11 virtuous mental factors in Abhidhamma. Chief among these would be the element of self-respect and self-esteem. That is my translation for what is normally called shame. In a modern secular context, shame is intrinsically connected, by the way, to species difference. If you're naked in front of your cat, you don't feel shame. And the cat doesn't feel shame. How about if you're naked in front of your computer? Do you feel shame? In an age when social media would appear to have radically destabilized and perhaps destroyed the experience of intra-species shame as a foundation of social relationships, the Buddhist emphasis on compassion, regardless of species difference, has become more important than ever. Awareness technologies that focus only on the realization of emptiness without corresponding expression of compassion for technical beings presents an enormous risk and, in my humble opinion, are not consonant with Buddhist teachings. Thank you very much.